For almost a year now, pro-Russian rebels have been fighting for independence in the eastern Ukraine provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk. Despite a truce and a tentative peace deal with Ukraine's government last September, the war has escalated yet again. So far, more than 5,000 people have been killed, more than 12,000 wounded. The crisis could be about to worsen as both sides battle for military advantage. With Russian and Western interests also in play, it's drawing renewed international attention, and there are renewed efforts at a diplomatic solution. Here is what U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had to say in Kiev on Thursday.
We're not seeking a conflict with Russia. No one is. Not President Poroshenko, not the United States, not the European community. That's not what this is about. First of all, there must be an immediate commitment now to a real ceasefire, which is not just a piece of paper and words, but which is followed up by specific actions, namely, pull back the heavy weapons from the ceasefire line, from the borders, beyond the range of artillery, beyond the range of certain munitions to be able to do harm to civilians.
For more now, joining me from Kiev is CCTV's Kate Parkinson. And Kate, there we heard the Secretary of State John Kerry talk about some of the conditions that he wants to move this diplomatic process forward. The German and French leaders are also involved in the talks. They will be in Kiev, then they go on to Moscow. What's the latest?
Well, yes, following his talks with the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, Kerry also said that he wants Russia to show its commitment to trying to find a peaceful and diplomatic solution to the conflict in eastern Ukraine. And as you said, diplomatic efforts to try and resolve this crisis intensified dramatically on Thursday when the French and German leaders made a surprise announcement that they would also be visiting Ukraine on Thursday and then go on to Moscow for talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday. The fact that they made this surprise visit, which reportedly was decided without consultation with U.S. officials, perhaps shows a difference of opinion between some of Kiev's allies on how best to solve the conflict in eastern Ukraine. As you know, it's been a lot of speculation in the last few days over whether the United States is on the verge of changing its policy and making a decision on whether to send weapons, lethal aid as they call it, to the Ukrainian military. This is something that some European countries are strongly opposed to. It's something that Germany has spoken out about in the past.
All right, Kate, and while these diplomatic efforts are going on, I understand that the fighting has escalated in eastern Ukraine. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, fighting continues to rage in the east of the country. It's really been escalating on a daily basis for the past few weeks now. The latest figures that we're hearing from the east are that at least 8 civilians were killed in Donetsk yesterday. That's according to rebel authorities. The Ukrainian authorities say at least 6 civilians killed and 5 Ukrainian soldiers. It's a pattern we're seeing repeated on a daily basis as multiple civilian deaths and military deaths as the fighting continues to escalate. This is a conflict, as you said, that has killed over 5,000 people already. The latest figures we're hearing from the United Nations are 5,350 people killed in this conflict, and a few hundred of those at least in the last few weeks as fighting has flared up once again.
Of course, this is not the first diplomatic effort. There was a peace agreement in place, the so-called Minsk agreement. Whatever happened to that?
Well, yes, the ceasefire was agreed last September, as you say, agreed in Minsk. That was back on the 5th of September. I was actually in Donetsk when that ceasefire was agreed. And in the hours, even in the minutes after it was supposedly implemented, we could hear heavy shelling on the edge of the city. Really, the ceasefire was never fully enforced, both sides accusing each other of daily violations. And yet, despite the fact that the violence continued, it did reduce the intensity of the violence while it was in effect. But that ceasefire completely fell apart a few weeks ago when the rebel leader Alexander Zakharchenko in Donetsk announced that his forces were on the offensive. They wanted to push Kiev's forces out of striking distance of their stronghold, they said. And they said they were no longer interested in truce talks with Kiev. And in fact, just last weekend, the various stakeholders did meet in Minsk again to try and reach a ceasefire agreement. Talks fell apart within a matter of hours. There's no indication of when the various stakeholders will get together again, and indeed no ceasefire on the horizon at this stage.
Thanks, Kate. That's CCTV's Kate Parkinson talking to us from Kiev.